All right, cool. So today we're going to be talking about measurement. This is a topic that, again, I added this module into the class. It's not in the textbook, so so there's not really anything to follow along in terms of text for this week. But I think it's important because really, so last week we were talking about obvious things: mission, vision, values, trying to understand strategic operational decisions that a company is going to make. And we started talking about goals towards the end of that and how it's important and what those look like and core competencies. But really, these metrics are what's most important to an organization. Once you do that strategy building session, whether you're kind of red ocean or blue ocean, doesn't matter. When you get the team and you figure out strategically where you want to go, you've got to figure out what those goals are. And they have to be grounded, they have to be time bound, they have to be really specific. And companies struggle with this. There's kind of two approaches that companies tend to take, because this in and of itself is almost like a strategy session. Like there is an art and a science to it. So either companies go way overboard and try to measure everything under the sun, which usually has an impact of just stressing people out because there's so much to focus on that it's overwhelming, right? There are too many things, and sometimes those metrics might compete with one another. So that can be challenging. Or you could have a great strategy session and then there aren't really clear goals. And then everybody just kind of like does their own thing and you're not really making the progress that you want to see. So KPIs and measurement is, again, I inserted this topic into the course because I think it's important. I think it's relevant. I know companies struggle with it. So that's what this week is. There's not a ton of content, but I want to make sure that these concepts are clear to you before we move on, because again, the rest of the semester, we're going to be doing a lot of measuring. We're going to be looking at quantitative models to try to figure out how to make good decisions, but we've got to know that we're making these decisions in alignment with one of our goals or our key performance indicators. All right, so KPIs, key performance indicators. I think when we did our introductory calls the first week, there were a few of you that said like, yeah, we have KPIs at whatever company it was that you were working at. So again, these are just quantifiable measures that an organization is going to use to measure performance. The key being that they should be directly aligned to those operational goals or whatever that strategic plan is for the organization, right? Because there are a lot of things that would be nice to have, that would be great, but if it's not tied to something that you as a company need to do to like have a competitive advantage or to kind of step into a new market space, then it's not really a KPI, right? So a lot of companies will say, yeah, we have KPIs, but are they really? Do they actually tie to your strategic goals? If not, then they're not really key performance indicators. All right, so some examples of what these can be. Again, this is really kind of understanding how, or a way to measure how the company is doing operationally, and again, making sure it's aligned with strategically where the company wants to go. So if you're on a sales team, obviously you're probably going to be looking at revenue. How many new customers are you bringing in? Customer support team might be measuring average on-time hold for customers, right? If you know that you've got a big influx of calls and you really want to focus on that customer experience, you probably want to see how long customers are waiting on a call before they can actually talk to somebody. Generated sales leads. If you're doing human resources work, you could look at employee engagement. You could do that through surveys, or there's other ways that you could potentially measure that. And then if you're in some sort of manufacturing industry, you could be looking at the time from, we had talked about this on the first week, but the time that the raw materials are coming in to the time that you have a finished product, and looking at that entire lead time. Looking maybe at quality indicators that say how many defects do we have typically in a day, and making sure that you're doing things to kind of reduce that. It totally depends on your business, right? So these key performance indicators, right, could really be anything. They have to be tied to what's important to your company and your business. We're going to get towards the end of this conversation a little bit more nuanced with an outcome metric versus a process metric. Really important that we understand those differences. But key performance indicators can be either. They can be like a high level outcome metric, or they can be something really super specific. So I always try to weave in lean thinking. And KPIs and really kind of understanding these are really important for growth and process improvement. So when we in kind of the lean world talk about a problem, try to think optimistically about it, really a problem is an opportunity, right? That's something that you know as an organization is important and you need to work on. So there's two ways if we think about measuring. So we've got this little guy with a measuring tape down here, right? You have something that you want to measure. Um, let's say you're working at an Apple store and you are really looking at that customer experience because that's so important to that business and to their brand management that they want to make sure that that wait time from the time somebody comes in and logs into the system to the time they're meeting with a technician, that's really as short as possible. So you would have your current performance in terms of what is that wait time for somebody in an Apple store to talk to somebody, right? And then you're also going to have a target. So it's really important to always be kind of setting the stage for what do you think is reasonable? Is it 0 minutes? Is that something that's important to your business? Or do you think that maybe 5 minutes would be okay because they can browse a store a little bit, but they're not going to get totally frustrated and leave? So there's a target, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be 0 or nothing. I think as a team, you really try to determine what's achievable. We're going to come back to these SMART goals. One aspect of it is being achievable, what makes sense. So when you know what your current performance is, maybe it's 10 to 15 minutes before you meet with a technician, and you want that target to be 5 minutes, then there's basically two ways we can think about this as being a problem. We can either have a gap, that being that we want it to be 5 minutes and we're just not there yet, right? That creates an opportunity for us, again, if customer service is really important to us, that again could be a key performance indicator then that's going to go up on a dashboard and that we're going to be as a team striving for every single day. But there's another way as we think about growth, the growth mindset and continuous process improvement, is that maybe originally the target was 10 minutes for the time somebody comes in and logs in to the time they're seeing an Apple technician. And then maybe you hit that 10 minutes and all of a sudden you said, really, we want to set the bar higher. You can raise that bar, you can change that target, and then you're creating a gap. You're creating a problem because you're going to continue to push yourself to move a little bit closer. Again, try to have the best possible customer service. Again, it's all dependent on what you think is reasonable, what's achievable, and most importantly, what's in alignment with the things that are most important for your business. If you're Apple and you're looking at those stores, which again is now that's totally shifted, right? So now in terms of customer support for Apple, that's going to look completely different in terms of how customers are reaching out for that support that they need. So while they may have had a KPI and wait time in the stores, maybe that has completely shifted to wait time and their ability to connect with somebody online. So kind of a word of caution, and this is what the discussion post this week is all about, is that, again, KPIs, you can just go really overboard with them. So I'm going to kind of start on the right-hand side and just talk through some of the key pieces that I think or where some companies make mistakes, is that maybe you have a KPI that like is a feel-good KPI, like maybe it could be if I don't know, if you're a restaurant or some sort of retail business and you're looking at like Instagram followers, or you're looking at maybe like positive social media posts that people have done, that could be really important to sales in your business, but it might not be what's most important. There could also be like different feel-good events or like collaborations with people that are things that are good, but might not necessarily be that important to your core business. So again, it's really important to make sure that they snap back to your strategic plan and those operational objectives. If it's too easy to measure, so sometimes this is where, I guess, if you have a KPI that is just automatically generated all the time and it's both really easy to achieve and like people don't really have to change what they're doing to achieve it, then that's obviously not a good KPI. It should be something that you're striving for that's going to help the organization to grow. Let's see, again, another mistake is not time bound. We're going to talk about SMART goals in just a second. But it is important that as we think about KPIs, that over on the left-hand side, that they're that they're really super specific. So everybody knows exactly what you're measuring. They are measurable. They're achievable or actionable. They're relevant, again, that they go back to your strategic plan and operational decisions that you have to make. And most importantly, that they're time bound. This is another mistake a lot of companies make, is that there's not a due date. When you're setting goals or a target, you need to say, when do we want to achieve this by? And that's not to stress anybody out or create a lot of pressure, but you have to know and have a plan for what experiments are you going to run and what changes are you going to do to help you make traction toward that goal. And if it's not time-based, again, what tends to happen is that teams will flounder, right? You'll have a bunch of people working on some pretty abstract things, but when you don't have that sense of, we really need to achieve this by a certain date, you know, it could just be a goal that you're kind of perpetually working towards, and you never make real improvement. So having them time bound is also very, very important. So when we think about key KPIs and any data, I'm not sure if you guys have really had this in many of your classes yet, but data visualization is so important. So we know that employers of our students, whether they're at the undergrad or the graduate level, the data visualization is something that they continually come back and say is really important, a skill set that they want to see in their potential new hires. So data visualization, there's an awesome software package called Tableau. We're not going to be using this in the class, but you guys all have access to it through SUNY Oswego. I would definitely go and check it out. It's basically, you can pull in data from Excel, and it just gives you more options in terms of how you visualize things that are not just a straight like bar or line graph. You can start to look at things geographically by region. There's a lot of options for colors. If you think about some of those like really interesting infographics, right? It's kind of pulling in some of those same theories or concepts, because you can have raw data. You can have, you know, somebody talking about what you're doing as an organization, but what you really need is you need that stuff to be readily available so that somebody can quickly look at something and completely understand what you're trying to do and why it's important, right? So Tableau is a great product a lot of companies are using, because you can create not just graphs for PowerPoint presentations, but you can actually create dashboards that then your entire team can log on to, and you can see your key metrics, right? Maybe you've got like 5 or 6 KPIs that you're tracking, and they should be real time so that everybody can log in or see them every single day and know where you stand. Another reason, besides just making sure that anybody can understand it as a glance, is we want to make things visual, because as soon as there's a blip, those abnormalities become really obvious. If the data is visual and we have clear targets, then when you start to see a downward trend, right, then you can rally the troops really quickly. Whereas if things aren't visual, you might not know until a couple weeks out, when you're really looking at the data and pulling it together, that, hey, we have a problem we should do something about. So the more that it can be up, I know a lot of companies, again, are using these Tableau dashboards. I am always, in the kind of the lean philosophy too, is that as much as you can have things up visually on a board, so whether that's whether you basically have like a mounted TV somewhere where everybody can have access to those same KPIs, those visual KPIs, that's going to be what's going to be most beneficial for the team. Again, because that comes down to purpose. You're all working towards a common purpose, and you can see it on a daily basis where you stand. So this is an example of one for a hospital. So these are just some of the kind of normal KPIs that a hospital would be looking at across the board. Now, what I would definitely suggest though too is that if you're doing some sort of Tableau dashboard like this, that this is very high level, and this is for a hospital, as a whole. But you should really have some of these things that are a lot smaller in scope, that's just for a small team, so that you've got a smaller group that's working on things. Because if I'm a nurse and I'm looking at average length of stay for patients across the hospital, it's really hard to understand how my actions on a daily basis are influencing that number. But if you have it for just your unit, then that picture becomes a lot more clear. So SMART goals. I think you guys are going to hear, if you haven't already, hear companies start to talk more about SMART goals. I mean, this acronym has been out for a very long time, but as I said earlier on, a lot of companies still struggle with actually putting it into practice. So again, as you're going through that kind of goal setting process, looking at your KPIs, that you're finding that you're again getting very specific with exactly what it is you're looking at, because two people could think, if let's say your goal is to improve customer satisfaction, you've got to be really specific about exactly what you mean and how you're actually going to measure it, because there's probably multiple different ways that you could be getting that information. So how specifically are you going to be measuring customer satisfaction? What are your goals? Is it attainable? Is it relevant? Does it tie back to, again, if your competitive advantage, if you're talking about customer service when it comes to a grocery store, for example, that would be most relevant to a company that has a competitive advantage that's focused on differentiation. If you're Walmart and your competitive advantage is focused on cost, even though it's not to say that customer satisfaction isn't important as Walmart, you have to make sure that these goals, again, are tying back to whatever operationally you want to achieve. There should be a lot of alignment there. And if there's not, you probably want to round back and say, is this really what makes the most sense for us to be focusing on? Okay, so this is kind of the last topic that I'm just going to talk about today before we kind of hop off and have some question and answer, but types of measures. This is something that I have worked, again, with a number of people in operational positions that still don't really understand the difference between a process and an outcome metric. And the difference is so important as we talk about process improvement and growth of the organization. So an outcome metric is basically measuring results achieved. That's something that's very high level for the organization. It could be revenue, it could be customer sales, it could be quality defects or rankings. And all of those things are very important to track. Those are kind of your high level KPIs. But under each one of those high level KPIs, you're also going to have a process metric. So that's helping us understand what things are we doing on a daily basis that influence those high level outcome metrics. So again, we could be looking at, let's take a manufacturing organization, and you're looking at, actually, let's take Amazon. Let's talk about Prime shipping, because that's something that especially now we're all kind of dealing with. So because Amazon has a competitive advantage that is so heavily focused on response, again, which kind of falls under differentiation as we think about competitive advantage, they need to make sure there's absolutely an outcome metric for them to say that any Prime shipment is going to get there within 48 hours, right? So that could be their high level outcome metric. But then there has to be process metrics that kind of snap in underneath those. So process metrics that might influence that shipping time could be number of trucks on the road. It could be accuracy of the forecasting model, right? Because if you're forecasting demand for a certain product or service, that's going to influence basically all of the things that need to be in place for you to be able to ship and deliver that good to the customer. So process metrics are basically force us to really think critically about what are those factors that are going to influence that outcome metrics, and that's where we can focus, right? Because if you're just focusing on, oh, we have to go faster, we have to make sure that every Prime shipment is, to the customer within 48 hours, that doesn't really help us focus clearly enough, get specific enough to make some real improvement. But by looking at those process metrics, so for each outcome metric, you might have a handful of process metrics that influence them. Just pick one and focus on it, or have a team just focus on one of those process metrics and see and make sure that that connection is there. And so maybe as they increase or improve the forecasting models, you're going to see that you're going to be able to more accurately kind of put all the logistics pieces into place and make sure that you can always have 100% accuracy when it comes to the Prime shipping. And all of this is just, again, steeped in progress and process improvement. We have to know, as we're doing process and performance improvement, that what we're doing is actually making a difference. So this is another thing that a number of organizations do, is that they'll have a relatively clear idea of strategically where they want to go, what their competitive advantages, maybe what some of those really important outcome metrics are. But as they have teams and different initiatives that are working on projects to improve them, they're not constantly tracking that progress and coming together and looking at how they're doing with both the outcome and the process metrics. And that's what's important, right? Is we're kind of going to follow that PDCA, that Plan, Do, Check, Act, because if we have a major initiative and we've got a lot of labor and time and maybe capital expenditures focused on that, assuming that it's going to help an outcome metric, and it doesn't, we need to know that so we can stop what we're doing and kind of redirect our efforts, right? And it's not to say that that's a failure. That is organizational learning, right? That goes right back to the growth mindset, to lean into process and performance improvement. So there's a quote at the bottom of this. So Don Berwick is the former president and founder of IHI, it's the Institute of Healthcare Improvement. He does a lot of work in the lean space, and he's really well known for saying that all improvement requires change, but not all change results in improvement. Again, the key to understanding what's working and what's not is measurement. And we just have to get really good at understanding which metrics make sense for the company. And then when we have those outcome metrics, making sure that we can kind of chunk them out into process metrics and then test those, right? Have different things that we're working on, make sure that we're seeing improvement and that are basically what we're doing every day operationally is helping the organization to move forward. So that's a lot. I know I kind of flew through that. I'm going to stop sharing and I will stop recording this as well. So you guys